He was asked about Case Keenum's veteran leadership and how his experience helps him out.
Yeah, I mean, the experience really shows. I think that showed up on game day, how he was able to operate, how clean we were across the board. He's able to he can go outside just himself. He helps a lot of other guys. If there's any confusion with alignments, concept, responsibility, he's on it. The fun part is he kind of loves the run game as much as he loves the pass game. That might be a little exaggeration, but he really enjoys just when he can make things right in the run game and when we can take advantage of premier looks to really get the run game going because he knows how much that helps the pass.
Okay, that's huge. And we saw that. And, Clint Sterner and I both thought this immediately after the game. It looked like at times Case had done a really good job of getting guys in the right spots, making the right checks in the run game. And I think that's one of the reasons everything clicked better than it had at most points this season. It's something that veterans can do when they just know and see things and can handle all the mechanics of everything else going around them. And to a level that I think you never really expect a rookie quarterback to be in charge of the run game in that way. It's something that I fully trust CJ Stroud is going to get good at in the future. Because unlike Deshaun, who never once seemed to care about the run game, and honestly, I'll give Stefanski credit. When I've watched Deshaun in Cleveland, Deshaun looks a lot more plugged in and detail oriented in the run game. That's which I would expect from Kubiak / Shanahan style coach. So this is where CJ gets it. He understands that part of it, like the whole approach to it. And I think he's going to be better at it. But that's the area of opportunity I was talking about with Myles Garrett, et cetera. When you're shuffling defensive linemen around on the defensive line, you've got opportunities there. You've got weak spots that you can attack. So that was really nice to see in here. Both Caserio and now Slowik talk about that this season. Okay, now this question, I believe, was in response to just that having that next man up approach and how they've had to do that with the quarterbacks and others this year.
Play Tennessee next week, and we just played them 2 weeks ago. And it's like, well, it's going to be the same game. No, it won't. It never is. It's always different. They do adjustments. We do adjustments. Our mentality is whatever we have to do to win this week, whatever we have to do to win this game. And last week against Tennessee, we felt like the best way to win that game was Case Keenum. And we feel really confident with our quarterback room and the 3 guys that are in there, now 4 with Tim. But we feel great about all of them. And we're going to do the same thing this week as far as whatever it is that we think gives us the best chance to win this week against the Cleveland Browns. That's what you're going to see on Sunday.
Okay, to me, that didn't sound emphatically like Case Keenum is starting. It sounded like, okay, we're going to do whatever it takes this week and whatever we think the best game plan is. Again, I'll be surprised if it's not Case Keenum, but I could see a world in which they think, okay, depending on the health of Nico Collins, man, Case didn't look all that strong driving the ball to the sideline. Case threw the ball up for grabs a couple times. You could attribute a lot of that to rust. I think that first interception especially was maybe him feeling like almost trying to feel more comfortable than he should have. But I think that they might be willing to put Davis Mills in, or at least have a Davis Mills package, depending on how the game goes, and just how tough and how tight the Browns defense is able to make those windows. And a lot of that's really going to depend on Nico Collins. When you look at, it's funny, when you look at the Browns defense and you look at the stats like percent man versus percent zone, they look like they play a whole lot of zone. And yet what they're actually playing is a lot of zone to man, where, all right, we start off in zone, but then we plaster the guys that are in our zone and we turn it into man, and they do it really, really well. So the windows get really tight. This is not some veteran quarterback can just look around and pick and choose his soft spots in the zone. They really, really plaster the receivers. Nico can help loosen that up a little bit. I want Case to play no matter what. I'm just saying, I don't think it's a slam dunk 100% guarantee that Case gets 100% of the snaps in this game. This is Bobby Slowik asked about the Browns secondary.
Yeah, they're tight. They're aggressive in coverage. They try to smother you. They try to make it where, within the timing of the play, you don't feel like you have many answers. And they kind of lean on their pass rush for sure, but they're talented in coverage as well. So you don't have a lot of wiggle room with this defense. It really shows up all over. It shows up in the pass game. It shows up in the run game. Like, you have to play some really clean, almost perfect football if you want to stay on the field and keep it moving.
Look, I mean, he kind of reiterated what I'd already said about that secondary, but the pass rush obviously is another big part of it. And I watch these guys too. Man, it's not just Myles Garrett. They got guys that can hunt all over the place right there. Myles is just obviously the marquee ticket item. And don't be fooled by the fact that he hasn't had any sacks in the last few weeks because he's a little banged up. He had 11 quarterback pressures in the game last week versus the Bears. 11. There's that. And he's one of those classic guys that even when he's not pressuring the quarterback or even when he doesn't win his pass rush, he's so long that he can still make the quarterback spin out or make the quarterback feel pressure. John Gennard's got a little bit of that too because he's got such long arms. So it's like don't be fooled by some of the breakdowns or some of the letdowns by the defense in the last few weeks. That comes with, you'll get those if you put enough stress on the Browns defense by taking care of your job defensively. And that's where, like, it's on the Texans defense. They got to play like they did last week. They have to make Flacco eminently uncomfortable. They got to force him to make some turnovers because, like, a dam's going to break eventually. That Browns defense is really, really good, but it's hard to sustain a team for an entire season if you've got the same quarterback for 17 straight games, much less an aging 38-year-old journeyman by this point. No offense, Joe Flacco, I love you, but you've been to a few teams over the last few years. All right, this is a good one. Yeah, I just cut out part of this answer. Somebody was asked about Dameon Pierce, as Devin Singletary just absolutely went off. And when Devin Singletary has been the main guy over these past several weeks, going to back around the Bengals game, when Dameon Pierce hasn't played and Devin Singletary has been the main guy, Devin has been an increasing force. Like, he's been a force, and last week he was a really, really good force alongside a better performing offensive line. Dameon Pierce got one touch last week. So here he is talking about Dameon Pierce and kind of his struggles he's had this season.
Definitely been pushed along and kind of how we want to read things, which I think is a different way of viewing it than he has had in the past. But he's still going where we want him to go, and he's still finishing with a lot of effort. Now he's getting a little less ops right now just because Motor has taken advantage of every opportunity he's been given, But it's still one of those where we want to make sure they're both getting on the field and they're both getting touches.
Two things about that. One, that's just confirmation. I think this is the first time we've really heard one of the coaches acknowledge that, man, Dameon has just looked uncomfortable at times, particularly on zone run plays. His one cut and go just it's not concise enough. It's not that stick your foot in the ground and get going upfield or on the cutback. Think about any vintage Arian Foster run. That's what you would see, that one cut and go. And Dameon does a little bit of second guessing himself and shuffling. The other part, though, I would say where it's not his fault is that I think that in some respects, Dameon just isn't as good at dealing with inadequate blocking as Singletary is. So Singletary, just through his shiftiness and his ability to be a little bit more slippery in the backfield, he can turn nothing into something a little bit more adeptly, or a lot more adeptly than Dameon. And so it's a skill that Singletary has that Dameon doesn't, but it's not technically Dameon's fault per se. So I think there's still hope and there's still a chance in the future. And then, the third thing I would say is he came into camp a lot lighter this year. Dameon Pierce did. He was going to be sleeker, wanted to be more of a force as a receiver. And I don't think that's him, man. I think he's got to come in as a barroom brawler. That's his game. And maybe they can have different packages for these two guys and just stick to more man blocking and power football with Dameon. And, with Devin Singletary, you can hit the finesse a little bit more. But it's just, I'm not giving up on Dameon Pierce whatsoever. But there's 3 weeks left in the season. Singletary might not look like a bell cow. He might not look like a guy who should get 25 carries a game for 17 weeks, but he can sure as hell get 25 carries per game for 4 weeks and on into the playoffs. So I go John Riggins on his ass. I'm good with that for now. He was asked about the disadvantages and advantages of playing a backup quarterback, how sometimes there can kind of be an ambush quality to it, but do defenses start to get clued in after a while?
My experience has been more often than not that first game where it's changed. The defense isn't quite sure how they're going to play. You have an idea, but then to fully adjust to it, usually it's always nice when you have a full game under or on tape that you can go watch and kind of scheme around. But then I also think a large part of it is a lot of the guys that are going out and they're playing really well right now are surrounded by good players. That's a big part of it. That's what we're trying to do here is we want to insulate our quarterback. We want to help our quarterback. We want to make sure that if they get the ball out, we can get more yards than maybe just what was given by scheme because we think the guys we're getting the ball to can go make plays.
I like the Browns, man. This is a gutty, gritty team. I wish that maybe circumstances were a little bit different, and maybe if these two teams can both make the playoffs, I'd be cool with it. I just until the Texans have actually guaranteed their slot, I'll despise the Browns. But man, they got some tough, gritty players, and Wyatt Teller, Ethan Pochich, and Joel Bitonio. It's a big difference. It's a big difference whether all three of those guys can play or not, because the Browns had a credible running game up until a few weeks ago. I think the combination of Flacco playing and then the injuries mounting on the Browns offensive line have just rendered it really a weak rushing attack over these last 3 weeks. The Texans rush defense has really come along, and that'll be a strength. And I think it's something they can still lean on, not having to crowd the box, not focusing on stopping the run as much, and still playing conservatively on the back end so Joe Flacco doesn't come up and murder you with a deep ball on a blown assignment. So I do feel good about that. As far as the you got to look at some of the top end players they have offensively. If you don't get too mired down in all of the injuries they have on the offensive line, the fact that they're playing Joe Flacco, I mean, they still have Amari Cooper. They still have David Njoku, obviously. I think Jerome Ford is a sneaky, sly threat, especially as a receiver. So it's not as simple as, hey, these guys are banged up. Now, the Texans are banged up. Nico Collins is a huge X factor in this game versus a really good passing defense in the Browns. Nico Collins can either loosen things up a little bit and back those guys off just hopefully enough, or without Nico Collins, those guys are going to come after everybody else, and they're going to blanket guys without a lot of fear. They don't need safeties helping them out on this. Like those guys can cover. So Nico Collins is huge here. The Texans' offensive line, I think sometimes we forget just how banged up they are, and that they are playing backups at left guard, center, and right tackle still. It's just that now when the backups get injured and we talk about backups going in, we forget that when the original backup comes back in, that guy's still a backup. Like, hey, George Fant's back. Awesome. Like, yeah, but he's still not Titus Howard at right tackle. And that offensive line is actually the reason that CJ Stroud's out right now too. So with CJ Stroud out, it's a huge deal. I do think that Case can help in the run game, but CJ Stroud being gone is just obviously a disaster. The Will Anderson dynamic also, I think, because the Texans played so well defensively last week, I think we've almost kind of, or at least in terms of what I see people talking about, I think that people forget that, like, okay, that's actually a big deal. And again, versus Joe Flacco, who can get outside the pocket, can run a little bit, but for the most part, you've got opportunities to get him down on the ground. They got him down on the ground last week a good amount. It hurts not having Will Anderson in there. The rest of the defensive line has chosen the right time to really kick it into gear, because without Will Anderson, you do lose something. But him being out, it's a big deal. Blake Cashman's the other guy that if he doesn't play, I feel better about the linebackers after last week. It's just that with Blake, you can do more. You can play Tampa too, where Blake's carrying a receiver down the seam every now and then. You can match him up on tight ends a little bit more freely. And I don't think he necessarily have to worry as much about some of these breakaway plays we've had when the linebackers haven't played well.